The tomb of Alexander the Great of ancient Greece may be in Illinois in the USA, according to a strange article with strange elements. And I'm translating from a Greek article. The strange and unbelievable news comes years ago when Russell Brown, in the early 1980s, claimed that he made a huge discovery, which however has many questions about it. It's plausible, he claimed, that he discovered the tomb of Alexander the Great, ? Is this a scam? Or is it a true event that can reverse the flow of history as we know it? But before we get into the details of the incredible story, let's see some things about Alexander the Great. Now, if you'd like, please watch the video before this one. According to the Argonaut ship, it was a flying aircraft. That will give you basis for what technology was around then. Now, Alexander the Great was a member of the Archaeological dynasty. He was born in Pella, Greece, in central Macedonia, in the year 356 BC. We also know that the Archangel Gabriel prophesied about him to the prophet Daniel when Israel was in exile in Babylon. Now, he succeeded his father, Philip II, to the throne at the age of just 20 years old. He spent most of his life in continuous military campaigns throughout Asia and North Africa, and he died young. In just 10 years, from the age of 30, he had successfully created one of the largest empires in the ancient world, stretching from Greece to India. Kindly support my Patreon account since YouTube has again demonetized my YouTube channel. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below. I've uploaded previous videos concerning Atlantean technology, some Atlantean extraterrestrial brought to him from Hyperborea, which is supposedly somewhere near the North Pole, and it was supposedly the lightning rod of Zeus. This is a copy of it in a Buddhist monastery in the Himalayas. Supposedly this was buried all the way at the end of China, that he supposedly got to the end of China just across, just at the coast of China with the Pacific Ocean. Now, in just 10 years, from the age of 30, he successfully created one of the largest empires in the ancient world, stretching from Greece to India, others say to China, although some say as far as China, as we said, and some others say also he got to close to the North Pole, although, of course, the latter archaeologists are few who accept these theories. Undefeated in battle, widely considered the most successful military commander in the history of the whole earth, but one of its greatest mysteries is the last residence of this Macedonian king. No one is obviously able to locate anywhere to prove where he could have been buried. Recently, though, an archaeologist claims that the real tomb of Alexander the Great was discovered about 30 years ago and had begun to emerge, and that this discovery has been ruled out by the Greeks and the Egyptian governments on the orders of the Methonians, who want to know who they are. And we can click here. Well, all right. Now the story goes that Alexander died of a mysterious illness at the age of 32 in Babylon in the year 323 BC. Celebrating the monument to honor the passage in the story of a close friend, he suddenly suffered severe pain and collapsed. He was taken to his bedroom where, after days of agony, he fell into a coma and died. Scholars are still discussing the cause of his death. Alexander was embalmed in a golden chariot filled with honey. As we know, honey keeps away all germs. So he was embalmed in a golden chariot. He was filled with honey, built to transport his body to the sanctuary of Ammon in Egypt. When the procession reached the border between Syria and Egypt, which met Ptolemy, one of his generals, Ptolemy stole Alexander's body. His body, along with all his burial objects since then, have remained a mystery until today. In the early 1980s, a man named Russell Burrows claimed to have discovered a hidden cave somewhere near Olney, Illinois, in the state of Illinois, of course, in the US. Apparently, he found human remains, metal weapons, and an ancient tongue carved into gold tablets and other valuables. This language was of Middle Eastern European origin and not of any known American Indian culture. As we know, and we said in the past, one of the professors, I think it was the year 1815, of the 13 colonies, wrote in ancient Greek to the chiefs of the Indian tribes of the United States. He says, "I'm writing to you in your native tongue," which was ancient Greek, "and in your own alphabet, which you know." And he warned them about not to lose their culture because of the expansion of the Western culture through the United States, etc. So this professor, he was a Grecian. In other words, he was a professor of ancient Greek language, wrote to them in ancient Greek, in the ancient Greek alphabet. It's the same as today's alphabet of Greeks, the Greek alphabet. So obviously he wrote to them because he says, "I'm writing to you so that you can understand what I'm saying." Now, going back to this, the most amazing thing about this obvious discovery was the fact that many objects that Burrows recovered from the cave strongly insisted that they were connected to the tomb of Alexander the Great. His findings had already been covered by his friends Virginia Hurricane and Harry Hubbard, who, in deciphering the writings and cataloging the objects, realized in detail outside the Egyptian and Greek scripts that many valuables contained. The work they kept in their possession has revealed a wide range of photographic studies of these objects, where photographic material indicates the fact that the historian rumors about the Gobi Desert in Mongolia and the closing of the gate pier by Alexander the Great tend to be true. Remember one of the past videos having to do with the pyramids, various pyramids in China and India. He supposedly did away with the Nephilim Anunnaki abominable races that were like half animal, half human. The ones that he couldn't do away with, he buried in deep pits, covered them with certain metals, and poured certain metals into the opening so that they would be toxic to these Nephilim Anunnaki abominable races, as he called them, and built pyramids over them. Now, many argue with the warm support of the Mythonians and the World Archaeological Service claimed in the following years that Russell's statements from the cave and the objects that they found and photographed were fraudulent because he still refused to reveal the hidden location of the cave. However, it could also be considered as a smokescreen, hiding from public view a real find of significant historical significance that would change the entire history of mankind. Now, around the same time, many archaeologists and the claim of archaeologist Liana Suvalzi that said that Russell has indeed found the tomb exactly where it should be, with all the evidence to be true. However, you claim that these discoveries are indeed skillfully covered by Russell, successfully by the world, so that they do not fall into the hands of the Mythonians and are destroyed like many other ancient finds from the American continent. There are other artifacts for the sake of space, and there are hundreds. We cannot put them all. You can see some hundreds of them in the videos. What exactly could be in this tomb that could be a threat to the modern perception of human history? What could be so serious that it would lead to international concealment of data? But let's look at some facts that we can understand why. The facts that exist about whether Alexander the Great went to Siberia are many and come from many sources. Al-Omari, the secretary of the Sultan of Egypt in the 14th century, in the book The Way, Through the Eyes of the Great Centers of the States, wrote that in the land of Siberia, which is very cold, and snow that covers everything for 6 months, traders went to Yugoslavia, where few people lived. Yugorskaya, where few people lived. Behind Yugorskaya is the north with constant darkness, where there is nothing but a large tower built by Iskandar. that is Alexander the Great. Now we know that in many countries, Alexander the Great is called Iskandar or Skandarbet. Okay, Alexander. Quintus Curtius Rufus, a Roman historian and orator, famous for the work The Story of Alexander the Great, writes the following. However, most of the year there is so much snow everywhere, of course he's referring to Siberia towards the North Pole, there is so much snow everywhere that there is no trace of birds or any other animal. Eternal darkness covers the sky day and night, and with great difficulty you can see what is next to you. There was absolutely no human presence, and the army of Alexander the Great suffered disasters from hunger, cold, excessive fatigue, and despair, end quote. In these icy northern areas, a bronze statue of Hercules was found, as well as Macedonian weapons and chests. The officers are made of gold while the soldiers are made of silver. It is still believed that there are 3 tons of gold of Alexander the Great buried somewhere there. The above written tests are a small sample among many documents. Studies on them have shown that the information can only be authentic. Example, from the length of the shadows of the trees at noon, today scientists concluded at a greater latitude and length reached Alexander the Great and the scientific team that accompanied him. So where was that? When you have long shadows, obviously, the sun is very low, creating long shadows, so you're pretty high up in the north. Now the map of 1673, to the west of Lake Teleskoya, is defined the road to the country Kataev, which met the road of the Macedonian Stratilatis, meaning, of course, the first general. Of course, we're talking about Alexander the Great. And this is the map dated 1673 showing where he got to. Now, Professor Bernard Hulevman's Soviet scientist Ivan T. Sanderson, Doctor of History and Philosophy Boris Fedorovich, and others support the theory that the Magog, that Alexander the Great imprisoned in Tartarus where Neanderthals and or other monsters known of antiquity. So in the Tartars mountains, Alexander the Great imprisoned, the Nephilim, Anunnaki, giants of old, the Genesis giant beasts, giants, and also, as we said before, put them in pits and build pyramids over them. Remnants of Neanderthals and Anunnaki, Nephilim, whatever you would call them, the filthy, the abominable races of Gog and Magog. They lived in 6 cities, writes Diodorus. The main city was on the cliff, was called Aorn, A-O-R-N. Hercules tried 3 times to conquer it but did not succeed. When the surrounding inhabitants who suffered from Gog and Magog asked for Alexander's help, he accepted this challenge, and as we'll see below. What Hercules could not conquer was conquered by Alexander the Great by giving 30 silver pieces to an old man with his 2 sons, and they showed him a hidden path. So Alexander the Great conquered the city on the rock Aorn. The map showed by Russians with documents that Alexander the Great was approaching the North Pole. And this is the Russian map showing us that where he trekked to, all the way up to the North Pole, Alexandra. That's where he got to from their documentary. So the Russians are proud of it because the Greeks are hiding it. When exclamation points, when they found parchments in Egypt that were written about Alexander, the Vatican took them and called on scientists to study them. He wrote things unknown to Alexander. Excited, the scientists said to come to Greece to bring the translations. The church reacted, and as 4 newspapers wrote, the Mount Talthus of the Christian Orthodox Church burned the ship Eleana that these scientists were on. Wow. So even the Christian Orthodox Church didn't want this out. In Lake Taimyr, Russian scientists claim that the library of the far north is located there, including the description of the history of Atlantis, the works of Asclepius and Hieron. But let's see. But this place is not easily accessible and has not been studied yet. It is at the North Pole. Did he finally cross the North Pole and reach the American continent? Did he instruct Ptolemy, one of his generals, to bury him there on an unknown continent in an unknown location where no one would find him? Daring thought, but not impossible to do. Let's see now why the Methonians do not want something like this to come out in the forum. Much has been said about the campaign of Alexander the Great in general, and more specifically about the part of it that took place in Central Asia, more specifically this part that took place in the Gobi Desert. What was his real goal when he dared to cross the harshest desert on the planet? What was it that led him to overcome all obstacles and defy the most adverse conditions to do this route? Before we explore the real purpose of this campaign, let's talk a little about the nature of this desert. Alexander the Great's campaign in the Gobi Desert took place around 326 BC, when he had completed the conquest of the Persian Empire and was advancing on Central Asia. The ancient writers state that it was very difficult to subdue the wild tribes of the area, and it took a long time to achieve this. Maybe with these reports, they're trying, in fact, to cover up the fact of the campaign. It was then in the province of Bactria, and following a course parallel to the river Ixos, reached the borders of the desert. It essentially following the course of the first expeditionary corps of Dionysius, who had first carried out a similar campaign about 2,000 years before Alexander the Great, although this is an epic of Nonnus, and many archaeologists, perhaps 90%, do not accept it as a true fact. He crossed the same impassable paths to enter Xinjiang province, which is dominated by the desert today in Chinese territory. We derive the information about this event from ancient texts that make hints about what happened. There are also reports of people with white or auburn hair in some Chinese myths, but also in the Mongols. And because we are talking about myths, the myth always hides nuggets of very old truth. The references to such people refer to ancient times of Chinese history and therefore coincide in time with the realization of the Dionysian campaign. The proof that this campaign took place is given to us today by the findings that are constantly coming to light from excavations that are taking place in the area. These excavation efforts have revealed the ruins of entire cities which are built with an ancient Greek street plan. There are foundations of buildings with ancient Greek construction, with an inner courtyard and a special space for the main hearth of the house. That's where they kept the fire always lit. The most important finds, though, were not the buildings, but the mummies found in the dozens of graves in the area. There were too many millennia old mummies, perfectly preserved from the drought of the desert, and most paradoxically, the mummies did not look at all Chinese but European. The mummified bodies belonged to tall, red-haired, and light-colored eyes. Obviously, the dead were not Chinese or Mongols. The oldest ones date back to the 19th and 18th century BC, and the most recent around 4th century BC, the time of Alexander. Among the bodies was a baby, who in the place of his eyes had blue stones, and some women who wore pointed hats like the Amazons. So who were these people after all, and how did they live in such a dry area? The second question is answered based on geological observations, which explain the possibility that the desert was once a fertile valley due to the altitude difference from sea level. But what about the people? What did he do there? Apart from the historians who mention why, but they had been found to be liars and imaginary by today's archaeologists with orders from the Methonians to do this, of course there is another report. It's the prophecy of St. Andrew, the fool for Christ, about what will happen at the end of the world. And it was the St. Andrew of Crete, the fool for Christ, who wrote about Alexander the Great locking the Nephilim, abominable races of half animal, half human, in the pits, and after doing away with most of them, and also building pyramids on them to lock them in to these gates. So as you can see here, this is one of the examples of a Nephilim, abominable races, when they're like half goat, half man. And this is what Saint Andreas, the Fool for Christ of Crete, said. In that year the Lord will open the gates of India that were closed by the king of the Macedonians, Alexander the Great. Then the 72 kings with their people will come out of it, the so-called abominable races, the vile nations, the Nephilim, the Anunnaki, which are more sinister than any abomination and stench. These will be spread all over the world. They will eat people alive, drink their blood. They will also devour with great pleasure flies, frogs, dogs, and anything dirty. Woe to the regions where they will pass. If it is possible, Lord, let there be no Christians then. I know that there will be. Those days will be dark as if morning in the air for the abominable deeds of those scheming nations. The sun will become like blood, and the moon and the stars will be darkened, as they will be seen on earth competing in impurity. These peoples will dig up the earth, make the altar a sanctuary, and put the holy utensils to dishonor. When those who live in Asia, let them go to the islands of the Cyclades, that is in between Greece and Italy, because the dirty, no, that's the Ionian Islands. No, the Cyclades are in the Aegean Sea. Okay, let them go to the islands of the Cyclades because the dirty nations will not go there. What did we just read above? That Alexander the Great, during his campaign in the depths of Asia, closed in the earth the wicked nations, the abominable nations, the Nephilim, the Anunnaki, the Nephilim giants, the half man, half animal creatures. He closed them in the depths of the earth, the Gogs and Magogs, sealing the gates that kept them trapped. We do not know, of course, whether Alexander intended this or that. It came simply about. It is important that we read that this happened, and it is certainly not a coincidence. Alexander there closed the pier gate with the lost the Macedonian children, his cruiser battalion, which consisted of 5,000 soldiers, and since then stopped the reports of dragons, monsters, and everything else that existed before. These were coming from out of Middle Earth. So in the end, weren't these reptilians that Russell said were extraterrestrials, and were they extraterrestrials? Were they the famous draconian race? And the reason they make this global cover up is for people not to know their existence, perhaps? Question mark. Could there be a tomb of Alexander the Great? For conventional archaeology, not even with spheres. But let me remind you that the Oracle of Delphi had sent Spartans to South America. And there are proofs here, Helion, also others like Hercules, and proofs, and I'll leave the links below. Did something like this happen with Alexander the Great? Who can actually know? But as we said at the beginning, what is the grave of the recruiter is an issue that is still wondering in many countries, and they claim it, and many fights have been made about this issue, about where the grave of Alexander the Great could be. As for Russell's findings, there are only photos and locations of the cave has not been made known yet, keeping the findings from the Methonians, as his associates say. But in addition to the information mentioned above, archaeologists say that it is a fabrication of a fake conspiracy for the purpose of advertising Russell, although he never did it himself. After all, is or is it not the tomb of Alexander the Great? Is it there or not? We leave it to your judgment. And if you ask what we think, after all the evidence that exists, as evidence, we could say that it could be there. It could be in any part of the world that have been reported to date. So just because of the fact that you don't believe in something doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So please leave your comments on this. And thank you for your support, especially all of you, of course, on my Patreon account. Please leave your comments. Thank you.